Okay, let's do a quick review of what we did last time. So we started from here. This is continuing on in the issue of Chatzi Shiur. So the Gemara said Gufa, meaning we're going to return to a mamar that we mentioned earlier, and now we're going to examine it in greater depth. So earlier we had this mamar Chatzi Shiur Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Min HaTorah V'Shlakish Mutar Min HaTorah. So that's what we're returning to. So now we expand on this a little bit more, and we say Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Min HaTorah Kevan Dechazi Etztrufe Isura Ka'achil. So Rabbi Yochanan gives a reason why he says that Chatzi Shiur is Asur Min HaTorah is because a Chatzi Shiur is Chazi Etztrufe. It's fit to be combined with more of a shiur, right? So if you start eating a Chatzi Shiur, that's eating, as we explained last time, eating a Chatzi Shiur is a prerequisite for eating a shiur. If you're going to eat a shiur, somewhere along the way, you ate less than a shiur until you ate the whole shiur. So that's his basic approach. Kevan dechazi itztrufi isura ka'achil. So since what you're eating right now is fit to be combined with more of a shiur, what you're eating now is asur. Reish Lakish amar mutar min haTorah, achila amar rachmana, v'leka. Reish Lakish says that eating a Chatzi Shiur is mutar min haTorah because the Torah only prohibits achila in Yom Kippurim, and v'leka ein. You don't have achila because achila requires that you eat a shiur. So kol zman that you haven't eaten a shiur, the Torah has nothing to say about that. And as I mentioned last time, I think this is related. I haven't found anybody who made this explicit connection, but I think this is related to the machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about shchita. That Rabbi Yochanan holds yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, v'Reish Lakish amar she'ena l'shchita ela l'sof. So that shchita, in a similar way, shchita is a process. Rabbi Yochanan says that shchita is a process. So from the moment you begin the shchita until you finish, that's all shchita for halachic purposes. And Reish Lakish holds that shchita is only at the end. It's only once you've cut rove, right, most of the kaneh and the veshet of the animal, only at that moment does it become shchita. And last week I mentioned for what practical difference do you make? But as a conceptual issue, it's an interesting concept. So, but then we said the Gemara now brings kasha from Rabbi Yochanan to Reish Lakish. So he says, "Ainli ella kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara." I only have anyone or anything that is included in punishment is also included in the azhara. So from last week, those of you who were here last week, so do you remember, what does that mean? Ainli ella kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara. Can anybody explain that?
Was it that the Onish was only on a shiur, and therefore the Azhara was only on the shiur, and therefore the Onish could only be on a shiur?
That's part of what's at issue here. But let's say better. So let's look at Rashi here again. So what we explained last week is that for every time that the Torah says something is asur and there is a punishment, you always have two sources. One source is going to tell you the azhara, which is the warning telling you that such and such is asur. And you'll have another verse or another part of a verse that's going to tell you that what the punishment is. So it's as if the Torah, it's parallel to this idea that if you do Aveira in front of witnesses, you don't actually you're not liable to punishment unless the witnesses warn you right before you do the Aveira. That's a halacha, right? So you have two witnesses, and they see. Take an extreme example. You're holding somebody, and you have a knife to his neck, and you're about to slaughter him. So they say, if you go ahead and kill him, you yourself will be liable to capital punishment. And then if you slaughter him, then you can be brought to Beit Din and tried and punished ultimately with capital punishment. So in an interesting kind of way, this is how Chazal understood that the Torah deals with all of us. The Torah doesn't just give you a punishment, it gives you an azhara. I'm sorry, one moment. So what is the onus, the azhara that we're talking about here? So we get it from a little bit later on, but Rashi already fills us in. So this question that Rabbi Yochanan is putting to Reish Lakish, he's taking it from the context of chelev. So we saw last week the Torah forbids eating chelev of a behemah, as opposed to chelev of chaya. Chelev of a behemah is forbidden to be eaten, and chelev, as we mentioned, so there are two kinds of fats in the animal. One is chelev, one is shuman. Chelev is one of the things that gets burnt on the mizbeach in a korban, but we are not allowed to eat it. So the Torah specifically says that one is not allowed to eat chelev. And Rashi points out, Ansho v'azharato smuchim ze lezeh. The azhara and the warning and the punishment for eating chelev are near each other. There's a pasuk that says kol chelev shor b'chesed ve'ez lo tochelu, which we saw last week, and we will look at that again in a couple of minutes. Kol chelev shor b'chesed ve'ez lo tochelu, harei azhara. That's the Torah warning you, it's saying that you're not allowed to eat chelev from a shor, a kesev, or a nes, right? And those are the three behemot from which we bring korbanot.
Sir,
yes.
It's written azhara. Shouldn't you read hatzhara? Because
why?
Why? Because you have to know that it's forbidden. So there should be a pasuk which says that it's forbidden. But this is not an azhara, it's an hatzhara, so that you should know it. And azhara is something which is, I think so, on spot. But why should it be on spot? We should know it in advance.
No, it doesn't have to be something that's on the spot. Azhara is it just means generally a warning. So in this, this is how Chazal used the term azhara. As I mentioned in later literature, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, the Paitanim that wrote poems listing all of the mitzvot of the Torah, that genre of piyut are called azharot. Those were called the azharot. That's taken, that idea of azharot is taken the way the Gemara uses the term azhara. Azhara is the Torah warning you not to do something.
So Azahara
So-
is a chok. It's an.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. In other words, you might have
If you
said,
say, if it said that Al Tirtzach or something like this, and this is an Azhara, it's
yeah,
it's a
like lo
chok.
tirtzach is an azhara. Lo tirtzach is an azhara, right? Because there we don't get the onesh there, right? There it just says lo tirtzach, and later on it says maka ish v'meit mot yumat. So that's the onesh. So this is the way the term is used. Azhara is the Torah telling you that something is asur. And here we have this pasuk. It says, "Kol chaylev shor v'chesed ve'ez lo tochelu, harei azhara." That's the azhara. The samichle, close to it, actually 2 psukim later, it says, "Ki kol chaylev min habehema," and the rest of the pasuk says, "V'nichrata hanefesh." Right? It says, "Kol chaylev min habehema asher yakriv mimena shel Hashem v'nichrata hanefesh shel chaylev me'amea." Harei onesh. Ainly shehe muzhar ela al kashiur shehu anush alav karet. So, based on these 2 psukim, what would I assume? I'll assume that the azhara only applies to somebody who eats a shiur. Why? The gabe onesh loktiv kol achelev ela ochel. Dichtiv ki kol ochel chelev. So let's just break that down a little bit. There's a difference between in the wording in the first pasuk and the second pasuk. So maybe at this moment I am gonna switch and just show the psukim. Shnia. Okay, so these are the psukim. Beginning on pasuk, here we are. Vayikra Perek Zayin, pasuk Chaf Bet. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, deber b'nei Yisrael lemor, kol chelev shor v'chesed ve'ez lo tochelu. So that's Rashi saying that's the azhara. So there's this word kol. So we have this word kol. So, and we also have the word kol in the other pasuk. So here, let's just put this together. That's the azhara. And then it says, right? So that we learn from that the chelev is mutar b'hana'ah, right? You can use it for malacha, but you're not allowed to eat it. And then pasuk kafeh, it says, Kikol ochel chelev min habehema asher yakriv mimena shel Hashem v'nichrata nefesh ha'ocheled me'amea. And then it goes on to talk about dam, which is going to be relevant. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. So when I read pasuk kafeh, it says Kikol ochel chelev. So what does that mean? Kikol ochel chelev. What is the kol? What is the kol referring to?
All the persons, not all the chelev, all the persons who.
Right. So any person who eats chelev from a behema, then he's chayav karet. So this is in contrast to the kol that's in Sukkah Gimel. Right there it says kol chelev shor v'chesed ve'ez lo tochel. So what is the kol referring to there?
This time it's referring to the chelev, which implies that chetzi shiur or any amount.
Right. So it could be here that this is where we'll see the idea of chetzi shiur. So, but if I only have the pasuk of the onesh, then what would be my assumption? Kol ochel chelev is chayav karei. So ochel or ochel, right? One who eats. I assume that the definition of achilah is going to apply here the way it applies in the rest of the Torah. That achilah is always defined as being a shiur. So then I would understand this pasuk to be saying, anyone who eats a shiur of chelev, a kazayit of chelev, he'll be chayav karet. So back to the Gemara. 1 second. Right, so this is what Rashi's saying. We have the azhara and the onesh close to one another. Kol chelev shor v'chesed ezel tochel hare azhara. That's the first pasuk. Samichle ki kol chelchel min habehema hare onesh. So now Rashi is going to explain these words. Ainli ela kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara. So meaning based on these psukim, so I would start off by saying Ainli shiyehe muzhar el al kashiur shuhu anush alav karet. I would start off from the premise that the Torah is only warning us, telling us what's a sur based on what the onesh is. The onesh is your onesh anush karet for eating a shiur. And Rashi explains the gabe onesh, which is the second pasuk, lo ktiv kol achelev ela aochel. Right, the kol there refers to the ochel and not to the chelev. Ktiv ki kol chelev. So continue in the Gemara. Ainli ela kol sheyeshna ba'onesh yeshna ba'azhara koi v'chatzi shiur ho'il ve'eno ba'onesh yachol eno b'azhara. So a koi and a chatzi shiur, since they're not included in the onesh, so why isn't chatzi shiur included in the onesh?
Because it doesn't use the phrase kol chelev.
Right, so in the onesh, it doesn't say kol chelev, it just says kol ochel. So I would assume that I'm only going to be chayav if I eat a kazayit, if I eat a shiur that constitutes achila. And a koi, Rashi explains, koi shehu safek, vein bo karet, v'chatzi shiur she'eno ba'onesh, minayin shehu tzara. So koi is a safek, right? So we saw the Mishnah last week. Koi is a safek behema, safek chaya. So the premise of this isur of chelev, as we said, is that one is not allowed to eat the chelev of a behema, but then it would imply that one is permitted to eat the chelev of a chaya. Right? Chaya is not included in this pasuk. So koi is a safek chaya, safek behema. So since it's a safek chaya, safek behema, safek, it's included in the onesh. If you eat the chelev of a koi, it shouldn't be included in the onesh. And chatzi shiur, like Michael explained, so chatzi shiur is less than a shiur, so it's also not included in the onesh, right? So minayin shuhu ba'azhara. So where would I learn out from that eating either koi, chelev of a koi, or chatzi shiur of chelev from a behema, where will I learn out that the Torah put that in the azhara? Meaning, where would I learn out that that eating those things are nonetheless asur? So again, the premise is that if we include something in the onesh, that's what should be included in the azhara. So here in the onesh, I've only included in chelev behema a shiur, so that'll exclude anything that doesn't fall into that category. If it's less than a shiur, or it's not from a behema, then it shouldn't be in the azhara. So where would I see that it's from the azhara? Talmud lomar kol chelev, right? And Rashi says, Talmud Lomar kol chaylev lo tochelu, v'hacha ktiv kol achaylev, chomar kol afilu kol shu. Right, so here in the Azhara, the kol refers to the chaylev. And as we said, so it means that even any chaylev is now going to be part of the Azhara. So based on this limud, this is Rabbi Yochanan, this fits in with Rabbi Yochanan's stance. So Rabbi Yochanan holds Chatzi Shiur is Asur Min HaTorah. And here he's saying, look, the Torah is telling me in this pasuk of Kol Chaylev Lo Tochlu, that the Torah tells me I'm not allowed to eat less than a shiur. And that's why it says Kol Chaylev, any Chaylev, is how he'll understand it. Right. So Gemara answers, or Rish Lakish answers, Midrabanan. Says this drasha that you're telling me is only Midrabanan. I'm sorry, Midrabanan, meaning the Isur is Midrabanan. The Isur of Chatzi Shiur is Midrabanan. And this pasuk that you're bringing me is just Machta. And then Gemara says, "Hachinami mistaber." This is also this makes sense. Di salkadaitach deoraita koi sveikahu itzrich krala tuye sveika. So Gemara says, if you would think that the isur here is an isur dioraita, that chatzi shiur, that the Torah is telling me that Chatzi Shiur is an Isur Dioraita, you also want to include in this Koi. But Koi is a Safek. And do I need a Pasuk to tell me a Safek? So what's Rish Lakish trying to say here?
It can't be the way that Rabbi Yochanan is reading it. That the warning, it doesn't make sense that the warning would also refer to the koi when it says specifically the specific animals.
So in other words, since here, so Rabbi Yochanan wants to say this pasuk of the Azhara that says Kol Chaylev Shor V'Chesed Ve'ez Lo Tochelu. So he wants to say that Kol is coming to be inclusive. It's coming to add in something that's not explicitly mentioned, right? And we see this elsewhere. It's a common drasha, right? Because the Torah could have just said Chaylev Shor V'Chesed Ve'ez Lo Tochelu. Why does it say Kol Chaylev? I don't need Kol. If you just want me to tell, if you just want me not to eat chaylev of a behema, it's enough to say chaylev shor v'chesed ve'ez lo tochel. So the kol must be coming to add something. So Rabbi Yochanan wants to say, kol tells me any chaylev, so it's going to add in both of these things. It's going to add in chatzi shiur, meaning even the smallest amount of chaylev, and it's also going to add in koi. And why would it add in koi? Because koi is not it's not explicitly a behema. So I would need a special pasuk to tell me that it's asur. And the pushback is no. The kra is asmachta ba'alma, and it doesn't make sense to say that in the proof that it's an asmachta doesn't come from the side that kol means chatzi shiur. It comes from the side that you Rabbi Yochanan, want to say that koi is included in the pasuk of kol chaylev, because koi is a safek. And as we explained last time, what does it mean that koi is a safek? It means that we don't know how to categorize the koi. We people, we Rabbanan, we don't know how to categorize it, whether ma or whether it's a chaya. But the Torah doesn't have that safek. We don't need a pasuk. It doesn't make sense that the Torah would bring a pasuk, especially to clarify something that is a safek to me. The Torah will clarify what it needs to clarify. But if I have a safek, that's my problem. It's not the Torah's problem. So I'll deal with it using other Torah laws. So for whatever reason, and just to expound on that a little bit more, so the Torah never uses the word koi, it never talks about koi. Presumably, the assumption would be that at some time, like Moshe Rabbeinu at the time of the Torah, that it would have been known how to categorize a koi. It's something that could have been known, and we lost that tradition. So we don't know anymore if it's a behema or if it's a chaya. And as we saw in the Mishnah and Bikurim last week, so therefore, for certain things we treat it like a behema, for certain things we treat it like a chaya, and for certain things like neither one of them, and for certain things like both of them, like that's the whole thing with koi. So that's what the Gemara is saying. This is Reish Lakish's pushback. He's saying koi is a safek, and the pasuk of kol chelev would not be used to include something that's a safek to us. Right? Rashi says Ata Krali Buyaveka. Slightly different gear. So we have Itzrich Kra, he has Ata Kra. Ata means, right, does the pasuk come to include a safek? Bitmiya, right? As a rhetorical kind of question. Atu kame shmaya svekahu imeima vi yichayahavi. Are you trying to tell me that in heaven there's some kind of a safek about if this is a beima or this is chaya? God created the world. He knows which things are beimot and which things are chayot. So I don't need the Torah wouldn't be coming to explain a safek about something to safek to me, but certainly was not a safek b'shamayim. So that's where we got up to last time, and so now we finish off and we say Imi shumha lo irya. So we're saying back to Reish Lakish, if because of that, or if because of this, lo irya, ze lo mored, ze lo omer li klum. So what does that mean? Imi shumha, if because of this, if because of what? What are we?
The suffix.
The koi, because of the koi, they introduce something which is outside the Torah to have to get to a conclusion. I don't know.
Okay, let's tighten this up. Actually, the ini shumha here, it's going to include the things you're saying, but the ini shumha means if because of this argument, or it's if because of this argument, where your argument is based on koi, lo irya, right, then it won't tell me anything. Right, so it refers back to this aspect of koi. So just again to keep this in mind, in Rabbi Yochanan's claim is kol chelev. The kol is a ribui, right? It's coming to add in things that are not explicit in the Torah, and he says it includes chatzi shiur, it includes koi. Reish Lakish says no, it's an asmachta ba'alma, and I'll prove it to you because I'll tell you koi is a safek chaya safek behema, and I don't need a pasuk, or I shouldn't say like that. Not that I don't need. The pasuk will not go out of its way to clarify a safek for me if it's my safek. So then we say I mishum ha. So if your claim against Rabbi Yochanan is based on the fact that koi is a safek lo irya, then it won't teach us what you wanted to teach us. Kasavri koi bria bifnei atzmahi. Because I'll say that Kasavri is plural. It's not clear to me why it's in plural, but they think, in other words, Rabbi Yochanan and whoever goes with Rabbi Yochanan are going to hold that koi is not a safek. Koi is a bria bifnei atzma. It has its own categorization as an animal. So it's neither a behema nor is it a chaya. And as we saw this last week, and now we're going to bring Gemara here is going to bring a specific example with Gemara says this elsewhere, and I'll explain it in a moment. But the Gemara is going to say, Reish Lakish, your objection to the drasha of kol chelev is that it can't include koi because koi is a safek, and it's not a safek b'shamayim. It's only a safek to us, and the Torah is not going to tell me, give me a ribui to include a safek that's a safek for me. And so the Gemara pushes back on that and says, I'll tell you that the drasha of kol chelev is based, that include koi is based on the idea not that koi is a safek, but that koi is a bria bifnei atzma. In other words, we know vadai, we know for certain that a koi is neither a behema nor is it a chaya, and therefore I would need if I wanted to make a claim that the chelev of a koi is asur, then I do need a pasuk to tell me that. I do need something explicit to tell me that. So kol is as explicit as it's going to get. Kol will be the ribui that will include koi, and koi is not a safek. Koi is a bria bifnei atzma. It's its own special categorization of a category of animal. And then the Gemara in a moment, right after this, is going to bring this concept, this same, or I should even say this tension between whether koi is a safek or koi is a bria bifnei atzma. It's going to bring that as a proof from elsewhere, and I'll explain that in a moment. But that's the basic pushback, and where it's going to leave us is, yes, go ahead.
That's very strange. It looks as if you introduce something which is completely outside, which comes from outside, and then you destroy the argument with this. Now, you could do this, I don't know, but you could do this for many things. For instance, we talked about...
me explicitly what you...
Yes, for instance, it's written, lo tirtzach, yes? Maybe, what does it mean if we think of an alien, let's say? You're thinking now about something which is completely outside the argument. Am I allowed to kill an alien, or am I not allowed to? It's a safek. So because it's a safek, it will be allowed to kill also a person. It doesn't make sense, this thing.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that I completely understand your question. No, and I want to make sure I understand it. When we bring in, so here, let me say a couple of things and tell me if you still have a question. The idea of bringing in koi here, it's not completely alien in the sense that we know koi is something that people could see and deal with in real life. The Torah, for its own reasons, divides the animal kingdom into different groups. These are not biological or evolutionary divisions. These are halachic divisions, right? So for certain halachot, I have behemot, and I basically have three kinds of behemot that the Torah designates as being mutar al mizbeach, right? There's certain animals, domesticated animals, that you can bring as korbanot on the mizbeach. And then I have oaf, and oaf is also sometimes brought on the mizbeach. And then I have chaya, which is never brought on the mizbeach. Okay, so now I'm walking along and I see this koi. So a koi is something that people could really confront, and there's testimonies about it in the Gemara. This is, by the way, this machlok about koi, about whether it's suffix behema, suffix clay. There's a testimony, I think, from I think it's from Rabban Gamliel or Rabban Shimon Gamliel, I don't remember now which, where he testifies that he saw people who kept herds of koi, which would indicate that it's a behema, right? In other words, if you could keep herds of it, means it was domesticated. But not everybody agreed with that. Maybe that was a one-off thing. All right, we're not going to delve deeply into the aspects of koi. But now I need to know for all kinds of purposes whether a koi is a behema or whether it's a chaya. Okay, so as far as bringing it onto the mizbech, okay, I'm not going to bring it onto the mizbech. But here I have this question of chaylev. Chaylev is one of the things that I differentiate halachically between a behema and a chaya. So now I have to ask myself, I have a koi, I'm going to slaughter it, I want to eat it for dinner. And my question is, am I allowed to eat the chaylev from this animal? So it stands to reason, according to the tzad, according to the opinion that koi is bria bifnei atzma, it's reasonable to think that the Torah would want to clarify for me whether or not the chaylev of the koi is mutar or asur. So if there was not a ribui, if it just said chaylev shor v'chesed ezot chaylev, there was no other word that I could squeeze something out of, then I would say here the Torah says what chaylev is asur, shor kesed ve'ez. That's the end. So koi is not any one of those things. So I would understand that the chaylev of koi would not be included, and I could eat the chaylev of the koi. But once the Torah says kol chaylev, then it's reasonable for me to think, reasonable for the Rabbanan to think that is an indication to include this other category. So it's not going to include chaya, but it's reasonable to say that it'll include koi. That now I'll tell you, there's going to be a problem with all that. After I've done, I think, a pretty good job of explaining it, there is a bit of a problem with it, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But for the moment, and basically what I said to you is the way the Gemara is going to conclude. So once again, we have Rabbi Yochanan asks the question from the Isur of Chaylev. He says, Chaylev, eating Chaylev of a behema is anush karet. And the Torah gives us a pasuk of onesh, and it gives us a pasuk of azhara. So I would say, because of the way the onesh, the pasuk of onesh is phrased, where it says kol ochel chaylev, I understand that you have to eat a kazayit of chaylev, of a behema, in order to be chayav. But because of the way the azhara is phrased, because it says kol chaylev shor v'chesed ve'ezot ochelu, I'll say the Torah there for the isur of chaylev is going to bring in things that are not mentioned in the onesh. So in the onesh, I really only have chaylev behema, but in the azhara, I'll have chaylev of behema and of koi, and the filu chatzi shiur of behema. And Reish Lakish pushes back, and he says, that's an asmachta ba'alma. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan, you want to prove to me from here that chatzi shiur is min Torah, but I'll tell you, no, the whole thing is an asmachta ba'alma, and I'll prove it to you not from the chatzi shiur side, but from the koi side, because koi itself is a safek, and the Torah the Torah will not go out of its way to clarify a safek that's a safek to me. If it's not a safek chapei shamaya, it's not going to tell me, or I should, if it's not, ein davar kazeh shmaya. In other words, there is no such thing as a safek vis-a-vis the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's how we conceive of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't have sfekot, right? So fake is only my safek, and I don't need the Torah doesn't need to clarify to me my safek. So then the Gemara says, oh, if that's your reasoning, and your reasoning is based on this idea that koi is safek chayat, then I'll push away your reasoning, because I'll say the drasha of Rabbi Yochanan of kol chelev is based on the idea that koi is a bria bifnei atzma. In other words, it's a vadai bria bifnei atzma. It's not a safek. It just happens to be a category that is neither behema nor chaya. And then to bolster that idea, the Gemara then quotes from a Gemara in Masechet Kritot. So let's switch over to we're not going to do the whole sugya, but I want to give you a flavor of the sugya, no pun intended. So here in the 5th chapter of the beginning of the 5th chapter of Kritot. So we looked a long time ago at the first Mishnah in Kritot, and it lists all of the things that the Torah tells you that you're chayav karet for. And then as you go through the Masechta, it goes through and discusses each of them separately. So here by the 5th chapter, it's talking about the isur of eating dam. So actually before we look at that, let's just, if we continue on, sorry, 1 second. If we continue on where we saw about chelev in Vayikra Zayin, right? So it says kikol chelchem behema, etc. And then right after it says v'chol dam lo tochlu b'chol moshvotechem la'of v'la'behema. Right, you're not allowed to eat any dam in any of your dwelling places of fowl or of a behema. Kol nefesh asher tochol kol dam v'nichota nefesh ahi mea mea. Any soul that eats any dam, any blood, it will be chayav karet. So in the same parsha that tells us you're not allowed to eat chelev of a behema, it also tells me you're not allowed to eat the dam of behema or of oaf. So in the Mishnah, the Mishnah here goes into this into greater detail. It says, Achal dam shchita behema bechaya uvaof, ben tamein, ben tahorim, dam nechira, dam ikur, dam hakazash neshama yotzabo, chayavin alav. The Mishnah here is defining what dam, if you eat dam, what dam in particular are you chayav karet for eating? So it tells me if you eat dam shchita from a behema chayar of, meaning if you eat the blood that first comes out of the animal upon being slaughtered, bein tamein, bein torin, whether those are kosher animals or not kosher animals. Or also dam nechira. So nechira and ikur are other ways of killing animals that are not kosher slaughter. Nechira is when they would take, it's a little bloody, right? You may have guessed from the word nechira. There was a way that they would kill the animal by sticking up the blade up through its nostril, and I guess going into the brain. And ikur would be to basically stab the knife into the throat and rip out the windpipe in the jugular vein. All right, so those are obviously not kosher methods of slaughter. But nonetheless, the blood that comes out at that time is all considered to be the blood that the Torah forbids you to eat, for which you are chayav karet. And also dam hakazah shahaneshama yotzaba, right? So dam hakazah is blood literally from bloodletting, right? But it means if the animal if you opened up a wound in the animal so the blood is spurting out, then the blood, also the blood, even in other words, even if you didn't slaughter the animal, right, but you cut it somewhere else, so the blood that comes out, right, so that the blood that comes out, that until the animal dies, right, once the animal is dead, the blood that comes out after that, you're not allowed to eat, but it's not a chiyuv karet. Okay. It goes on. Dam hatchol, dam halev, right? So the blood of the spleen, blood of the heart. Dam beitzim. Beitzim here, there are two opinions of what beitzim means here. Either it's beitzim like chicken eggs, and blood from chicken eggs is not a chiyuv karet, or dam beitzim could be the dam of the testicles, right? Both things are discussed as possibilities. Dam chagavim, right? So chagavim are, like locusts. They're permitted. Those are things you're allowed to eat. They also have blood, but you're allowed to eat the blood of chagavim. Or as we'll see, dam tamtzit ein chayavin alav, right? So all these things: dam chol, dam halev, dam beitzim, dam chagavim, and dam tamtzit. So dam tamtzit is the blood. It's like the last blood that gets squeezed out of a person. Is dama tamtzit. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev b'dama tamtzit. Okay, so that's a machloket also here and also elsewhere. It has to do with also inyanei tumah v'tahara and so forth. So this is just to set the stage. So this is the Mishnah that the Gemara is concerned with here in Kritot, is to understand what blood in particular are you going to be chayav karet for eating? So the Gemara brings this braita. It says Tanura banan kol dam lo tochlu. Right, that's the pasuk that we just saw. Shomeani afil dam mahal cheshtaim, dam beitzim, dam chagavim, dam dagim, hakol bichlal. Talmud lamar laof labehema. Now, I'm not going to go into this deeply, but the Gemara here is going to bring a couple of drashot to look at the pasuk that we saw here in Vayikra, where it gives us not a lot of information. It says, Kol dam lo tochlu, v'chol mashotechem la'of labehema. That's all we know. So from here, I would say, if that's all I know, then I understand. I don't eat blood from the anof. I don't eat blood from the behema, and nothing else would be included. But note, we also have this word here, kol. Once again, we have kol, right? I could have done without the word kol. So kol is apparently a ribui. It's here to tell me things that are not explicit, that are beyond what it says about of and behema. That's the basic premise of what the Gemara is going to talk about. So this is how it starts off. Kol dam lo tochlu. So since it says kol dam, I am allowed to eat any dam, then I would say afilu dam mahal cheshtaim. Mahal cheshtaim, think animals that walk on two legs, meaning humans. We're at the mahal cheshtaim. So I would understand from that blood from humans, or blood from beitzim, or dam from chagavim, or even from fish, hakol bichlal. All of those should be included in kol, because kol is a ribui. Talmud lamar la'ofu lahabehema. So that's why the Torah goes out of its way and gives us a prat. So there's a klal, kol dam, and then it has a prat, la'ofu lahabehema. So, and then it's going to give us things that are characteristics of Ofu Behema that we're going to use to exclude these other things. I'm going to skip, it's very interesting, but I'm going to skip over it. I'm going to get to the part that's more pertinent to our discussion here. There's a discussion here about how this drasha should work. And does it fall under the category of klal uprat, or is it a klal uprat uklal? And there's differences in how you make the drasha depending on which midata drash you're going to use. So I'm going to skip all of that part. I'm going to come here. This is on the next Amud. Amar Mar. Amar Mar. Klal uprat uklal e'etadan elkein haprat. Ma prat mufurash davar sheyesh bo tuma kala v'tuma chamura v'yesh ba isur v'heter v'yesh ba v'hen min basar. Av kol davar sheyesh bo tuma kala v'tuma chamura, etc. Okay. So this is quoting the part that I skipped over. That it's how the drasha works. So the Gemara asks on this, Af kol diktani leituye mai. So this when the Torah says kol, right, kol dam, and it repeats it. So what does that come to include specifically? Amar Ravada Baravin, Latui damos shel koi. So the kol dam, what is the kol ribui for? It's for the koi. My kasava, right? And I understand it's going to include koi because koi, I wouldn't include from the words of and behema, which are explicit in the pasuk. And like we just discussed now, kol is a ribui, and it stands to reason that the Torah would want to tell me about koi because it's an animal that I might eat. So this is what Rav Ada bar Avin says. He says kol in this pasuk of kol dam, it comes to include the blood of a koi. My kasavar. So what does he think? He kasavar koi sveikahu. So what does Rav Ada bar Avin think? If he thinks that koi is a safek chaya, safek beima, itzrich kala mesar sveka. Do I need a pasuk to say to tell me that a safek is asur? Ela kasavar koi bria bifnei atzmoni. Rather, he thinks that koi is a bria bifnei atzmo, and that's why he can say that the Torah is telling me with the word kol, it's telling me to include the blood of a koi. So when I see this in the Gemara here, that's all the Gemara means. In other words, the Gemara, right? So the Gemara said, Reish Lakish apparently would want to say that the drasha of kol chelev is not going to include koi because koi is a safek. And the Gemara pushes back and says, no, I'll say that Rabbi Yochanan must hold that koi is not a safek, but it's a bria bifnei atzma. And it's just like what I see in Kritot with Ravidi bar Avin. That Ravidi bar Avin, when he darshan the pasuk kol of kol dam, he said includes koi, not because koi is a safek, because koi is bria bifnei atzma. That's that kata here of koi. This is just another place where I see that there's this tension between whether I think koi is a safek or koi is a vadai, but it's a bria bifnei atzma. And this is what Rashi says here. Adam Rav Idi Baravin Bekritot per Damashlita, what we just looked at. Af kol latuye koi, right? Kol comes to include a koi. Titani hatam kol dam lo tochlu la'ofa behema ma ofa behema miyuchadim. Right. So then Rashi also he skips over the whole drasha there. It's just to get this idea that a koi could be considered a bria bifnei atzma. But before we go on, I do want to address something that I think Paul brought up now, and I think you brought up before. So it's worth pointing out. So when I see this pasuk of kol chelev, or this pasuk of kol dam, so gam mibchina parshanut, also you could say, why does the Torah bring the word kol. It's superfluous. It's mutar. For Chazal, it's not just an inyan of parshanut per se. There's because Chazal understood that there's halachic import to every word in the Torah, and so they understood that kol is a ribui. Now, how did they know to bring any particular thing into that ribui? So there's an idea, though, that was part of the samchut of Chazal. Part of their authority is to make those kinds of interpretations. So even though kol doesn't tell me anything explicit, I'll understand that it's coming to include things that are not explicit. And then I gave an argument for Chazal. There's the argument for Chazal, why would they include koi? Why would they include chatzi shiur? Because within this context of halacha, both of those things are relevant. They're relevant questions that I need to deal with. Is the Torah allowing me to eat less than a shiur of something that it's otherwise forbidden? Does the Torah allow me to eat chelev from a koi, which is a real animal? Like if it was a unicorn, then I'd say, okay, unicorns pseudo. I don't need the Torah to tell me about unicorns. The Torah, it's reasonable to say that the Torah is telling me something about koi. And either that was something that was determined at some point by Chazal because they felt that it was relevant, or it was a tradition that Chazal were carrying on. And here it's not clear. Sometimes we know that it's like the Gemara will say it's Gemara Gemiri, which means it's like Halacha Moshe Misinai. Here it doesn't say, and the Gemara elsewhere talks about this idea of the samchut of Chazal. So I think it's worth mentioning that in this context. Kol doesn't tell me anything explicit, but it tells me it's telling me something that's relevant to this context. So that's how Chazal would understand it. So when I get to this part of the sugya, once I've gotten to this part of the sugya, basically this is the end of the discussion about chatzi shiur. So this part that we looked at today, beginning with gufa until the end. So gufa means, again, I'm going to look at closely this particular machloket in Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan says chatzi shiur is mutar min Torah. Reish Lakish says asur min. Mutar min Torah, asur min d'Rabbanan. So now, based on what we just did, what should I conclude? What should be my halachic conclusion about chatzi shiur? Is chatzi shiur asur min Torah, or is it asur only midrabanan?
From the Torah.
Okay, and why do you say that?
Because Resh Lakish's argument has been disproven or pushed aside.
Right, very good. So as we follow the sugya, Rabbi Yochanan asks the kasha in Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish answers, but then we push aside his answer. So what are we left with? We're only left with Rabbi Yochanan and his kasha. Right, his kasha on Reish Lakish. So it stands to reason that the maskana of the Gemara that I would say, even though the Gemara doesn't say it explicitly, stands to reason that when I come to paskin, I'm going to paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. Now there's other reasons that I'll paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, because throughout almost every machloka between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, there's a general rule that we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan against Reish Lakish. In fact, we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan against almost anybody else, because Rabbi Yochanan was the Gadol Hador in Eretz Yisrael in the generation after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and it was considered that his word was, in most instances, was the final psak. So when there's a machoka between him and Reish Lakish, in virtually every case we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. When there's a machloka between his other main contemporaries, Rabbi Elazar, who was in Eretz Yisrael, Rav and Shmuel, who were in Bavel. Halacha is almost always going to be like Rabbi Yochanan. But we see that's also, now the way the Gemara, bear in mind, when the Gemara is put together, the editor of the Gemara also wanted us to be left off with this conclusion, right? The Gemara doesn't bring another argument in favor of Reish Lakish. The Gemara wants us to be left with the conclusion that halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. This gets into some more historical analysis and some speculation, but we understand that the Gemara, the Gemara gets edited several generations after the time of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, right? They're first generation Moraim. The Gemara doesn't get edited until another 3 or 4 generations. So the editor who's putting them together edits it in such a way that where we're going to come to this conclusion. And this is the way all the Rishonim are going to hold. So I think to finish off today, instead of going further, I'll just show you a few things in halacha. Excuse me.
Shel,
Yes.
does this mean that the halacha in the end is not legufo shel inyan, but legufo shel adam?
You mean when it says gufa? I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, they say in the end, the halacha doesn't go according to the argument, but according to the reputation that Rabbi Yochanan.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, in other words, based on what I just said, do we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan because there's a general rule that we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, or are we paskin Rabbi Yochanan because he won the argument? Maybe it's both. In other words, in general, first of all, when I say the Gemara is edited in such and such a way, of course it is edited in such and such a way. I don't know if Reish Lakish had another counter argument. In which case, Rabbi Yochanan, right, Nitzeach Otam, right, he won the argument. When this famous story, which you may be familiar with, about Reish Lakish's death, which comes in the wake of Rabbi Yochanan inadvertently humiliating him. Do you know this story?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, Michael Schwartz, do you know this story?
I've heard it. I don't remember all the details, but I've heard it.
Okay, we don't have to go through all the details now because I want to move on. But one of the things that it comes in the wake of the story of Reish Lakish's death, Rabbi Yochanan, when he goes back into the Beit Midrash, so they try to find a chavrusa for him. Reish Lakish was Rabbi Yochanan's chavrusa. So Rabbi Yochanan starts learning with this fellow, and he says, he makes an argument, says a claim, and this other fellow says, yes, and I can bring you a braita that supports your claim. And what is Rabbi Yochanan's response? He says, if I made a claim, Reish Lakish, he would bring 24 kashas on me, and then 24 responses. And the best you can do is to support my claim. And it wasn't a joke. He was really devastated that he had lost Reish Lakish. So the reason I bring it up in this context is it very well could be that there was a much longer unrecorded discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about this question of Chatzi Shiur and about the question of Koi and all of these things. But what gets recorded is this. And it also, this is just in terms of my own thoughts, and it's nothing that I've seen inside. But one of the things that occurred to me based on that story is that it's not that Reish Lakish pushed back against Rabbi Yochanan just to make trouble, but maybe it was to some degree an intellectual exercise, which is also an act of Talmud Torah. And maybe even Reish Lakish himself didn't think halacha should be like him. But he was really there to challenge Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore, and by his challenging, he refines Rabbi Yochanan's shitot. And that's the greatness of, of learning in a chavrusa, where you have that kind of give and take. And this was maybe the greatest thing of Reish Lakish, because after all, Reish Lakish comes to learning much later in life, and he's a brilliant man, and all of these things. But it was, you see that what Rabbi Yochanan appreciated about him was his charifut, right, his sharpness. Anyway, that's all sort of my own speculation about that. Okay.
So Resh Lakish is making himself the advocate of the devil.
Yeah, So I think it's a question that I honestly always have. When Reish Lakish argues with Rabbi Yochanan, which happens dozens of times in the Gemara, is he just being devil's advocate, or does he really believe what he's saying? And this is in no way, God forbid, is in no way to try to take away from the kavod of Reish Lakish. But the point of playing devil's advocate when you're learning is a very important point. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, Chatzi Shiur Asur Min HaTorah. That's a very important thing to say. That should not go unchallenged, because the Torah doesn't say it explicitly. It should not go unchallenged. So Reish Lakish comes along and says, I could tell you that's not the case. So then we have the Shakla V'Tarya. So anytime, by the way, again, this is still a bit of a digression. Sometimes you see this, I believe you see this, like, for example, with Rabbeinu Tam, right? Skipping several hundred years. Go to the time of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam often argued with Rashi, his grandfather, not face to face, because Rabbeinu Tam was too young when Rashi died. And I could believe neither, I could look this up, but I think this was one of his opinions regarding Dinei Chol HaMoed, where he argues with Rashi, but then it's later brought down that Rabbeinu Tam himself didn't practice the way he presented in this argument, that he practiced like Rashi. In other words, the halacha, he actually held like Rashi, even though he made very sharp arguments against Rashi. So I think it's something that exists in real life, where you have somebody, and Rabbeinu Tam was also like this, right? He was a very original thinker, and would often push back against Rashi, where Rashi seems to be saying what's very obvious, and somehow Rabbeinu Tam, through his own brilliance, could take the same sugya and turn it upside down, and say, no, I think it means punkt vaker. I think it means just the other way around. I just did an example of this in a shiur I gave last week, where he literally turns the sugya upside down. There's a machloket Tanakama and Rabban Gamliel, and Rashi gives a perush to the Tanakama and to Rabban Gamliel, and Rabbeinu Tam says, no, the perush that you're giving to the Tanakama is how you should understand Rabban Gamliel, and vice versa. He literally exchanges it. And there it's clear, though, that he means of the halacha. Anyway, these are some thoughts that I have about this. But let's, in the last few minutes, let's take a look at some of these halachot. So in the Rambam, this is the Rambam in the second chapter of Hilchot Shvitat Asur, right? So the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, he divides the halachot of Yom Kippur into two sets of halachot. So he has the halachot of what we learn in the first 7 chapters, right? Avodat Yom Kippurim, that's in Sefer Avodah, and this in Sefer Zmanim we have Hilchot Shvitat Asur, and this is what we're going to be learning now in the 8th chapter. In other words, all of the dinim of Yom Kippurim that are not about Avodat Yom Kippurim. So let's just look at the first 3 halachot. Halacha aleph, ochel b'yom kippurim, ma'achalin haruyin le'achol la'adam kechotevet agasa, shipachod michbetza b'ma'at, harei ze chayav. All right, so if you eat food that is fit for human consumption, the size of a fat date that is a little bit less than the size of an egg, then you're chayav. All kinds of foods combine to make this shiur. Right? So similarly, if you drink any kind of consumable liquids, right? Any kind of drinks that is consumable for human consumption, enough to fill your cheek full, the cheek full for each person individually. In other words, this is not a fixed shiur, it's a relative shiur to each one of us. You're also chayav. So how much is this mulo lumav? It's enough to push the kishkeresh salkem, she salkem etzad echad, the Yeraem Melod Lugmav, right? So when you push to one side, and you can see the cheek. The shiur zeba adam beinoni pachot mi, and the shiur for an average person, this would be less than a revi'it. V'chol mashkim mitztarfin the shiur zev, ha'achila v'shtiya ein mitztarfin the shiur echad. Right. So these are all things that we learned when we learned in the Mishnah. Now the Rambam is bringing down the halacha. All all kinds of liquids are mitzaref to make a shiur, just like all kinds of foods are mitzaref to make a single shiur. But food and drink are not mitzaref to make a single shiur. Halacha bet. Echad ha'ochel ochlim ha'mutarim, o shechal dvarim ha'asurim, kigon pigul, v'notar, v'tevel, v'velot, v'treifot, v'chelev, v'odam. Right? Whether you're eating foods that the Torah permits you to eat normally, or you're eating foods that the Torah forbade you from eating. Since you're eating food that's fit for human consumption, like I defined already in the first halacha, chayav karet, mishum ochel b'yom kippurim. You'll be chayav karet for eating on Yom Kippur. Halacha gimel, achal sheta pachot b'shiur zeh, eino chayav karet. So if you ate or drank less than the shiur, you're not chayav karet. Af al pi shehu asur min haTorah b'chatzi shiur, ein chayavin karet ela al kashiur. Right? Va'ochel or shoteh chatzi shiur makin oto makat mardut. So we see here the Rambam explicitly is holding like Rabbi Yochanan that where Rabbi Yochanan, as we saw in his drasha of Kol Chelev, he introduces this idea that the Torah can be mazhira on a certain isur and not necessarily be ma'anish, right? Torah can tell you not to do something, and it may not apply a punishment if you do it, if you violate it. And Chatzi Shiur is this case. So, but nonetheless, if you eat or drink a chatzi shiur makinoto makat mardut, that is, makat mardut are the lashes that the rabbis under rabbinic authority can mete out. You can get makot because you're going to because you violated an isur Torah. The rabbis can mete out makot mardut. That's not the same as makot that the Torah says that you're chayav, or malkot, but I think they hurt just as much. So makot mardut are going to be meted out either if you're over on an Rabbanan, or in this case you're over on a dioraita, which the Torah did not apply a punishment to. I'm going to go into the next one because it's a question that Paul and I think maybe somebody else also brought up before, and we haven't yet seen this, but let's take a look, right? Achal ma'at, so this is the next halacha. Achal ma'at, v'chazar v'achal, right? So let's say you ate a little, and then you went back and ate some more. Im yesh mitchilat achila rishona ad sof achila achrona k'dei achilat shalosh beitzim, harei elu mitztarfot l'chashiur, v'im lav ein mitztarfot l'chashiur. So, if the time that elapsed from the time you started your first bout of eating until you finished the last eating, if the time elapsed was the same amount of time that one would need to eat the equivalent of 3 eggs, then so kedei achilat shalosh beitzim is how Rambam understands the shiur of kedei achilat pras. I'll show you the makor for the Rambam in a minute. So it's a shiur of time. The time it would normally take you to eat 3 eggs. Then, if that's, and let's just give that a time amount. Let's say that takes 5 minutes. I'm pulling that out of my hat. Of course, there are different opinions in halacha about how long this is, and also there's a machloket between the Rambam and most other Rishonim about whether it's kedei achilat shalosh beitzim or kedei achilat arba beitzim. We'll look at that in a second. But in any event, let's say it's 5 minutes. So it means, let's say you take a chatzi shiur, and then you wait 5 whole minutes from the time you finish eating that. So then when you start eating a second time, that second eating will not be mitztaref to your first. But if you ate something and then 3 minutes later, 3.5 minutes later, you ate another chatzi shiur, then it would be mitztaref. So, and we'll get into this much later on, but this is this idea that sometimes there'll be a psak for people who need to eat on Yom Kippur, depending on their particular status, where the psak might be that they should eat the shiurim. And what that will mean is that they will either eat or drink less than a kekotevet hagasa, or less than a melolu gemav, and then they'll wait a certain amount of time, and then they can again eat less than a shiur. And in principle, when it's necessary, you can do that all day, and you don't have to get to the situation where you're being doche Yom Kippurim per se. Right? So even though we just learned a moment ago, you're not allowed to eat a chatzi shiur. But what we understand is you're not allowed to eat a chatzi shiur, but you're not anush karet on chatzi shiur. So when will you be anush karet? When you eat a shiur within this span of time of kedei achilat pras, or what the Rambam says is kedei achilat shalosh beitzim. The makor for this is the Tosefta here in in the end of Yoma.
Shell,
Yes.
why do you need this shiurim if it's ונשמרתם בנפשותיכם? So I don't understand it.
So, like I say,
So,
I'll
so
get into
you wouldn't even get into the situation of the Malkot. And I don't understand because it's
So, like I say,
the person is ill. He should be allowed to eat.
okay. So, like I say, maybe I shouldn't have introduced that, but I'll say we'll look at that case more closely. But it's like this: there could be a case where somebody is not necessarily b'sakana ad kedei kach that the psak is that they should eat freely, but on the other hand, there's enough of a chashash that we don't want to say they shouldn't eat at all. So this gets into a very fine points of halacha, and it's something that a posek would have to decide based on circumstances. But sometimes this is what where the psak will come to, where they'll say because it's not clear that they are b'sakana ad kedei kach that I should be dochei Yom Kippurim for them. Maybe I could just say let's avoid, or sometimes it's also done for the peace of mind of the person who's eating. And you probably know this. I know this from experience. There are people who can be extremely stubborn about eating on Yom Kippur, even when the doctor tells them they must eat. So sometimes, if they, so this is something again, it would have to be coordinated with the doctor. So if the doctor says yes, if they eat a little bit every 5 minutes, that's okay. Or if they drink, usually it's more about drinking, right? But if they drink a little bit every 5 minutes, that's okay. And then that might make the person feel better. So that there is a reason for bringing it up. But in terms of the basic halacha, Paul, you brought this question up way back when we did the Mishnah, because in a sense, it's an obvious question, right? What does it mean to eat a shiur? What if I ate a shiur? What if I ate a chatzi shiur at night, and then 12 hours later I eat another chatzi shiur, right? But it's all on Yom Kippur, so maybe it's asur because on Yom Kippur I ate a shiur. So for halachic purposes, we don't say that, and this is one of the sources. So one of the sources is here in Yoma, Tosefta of Yoma, Perek Revi'i, Halacha Gimel, Ha'ochel b'Kippurim, Kechotevet Hagasa, Kamo v'Chagarinata, Shebi Eretz Yisrael, Chayav. Right. So this is just an expansion on the Mishnah that we learned, that if you eat a Kechotevet Hagasa and it adds in it and the size of its pit in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, it was a certain kind of date that was known in Eretz Yisrael at that time. That's the shiur for eating, for which you're chayav karein on Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says afil kikotevet hanimarin, which is another kind of date. And then it goes to some other things. Kanim, if you ate the leaves of a reed plant, ale gefanim, grape leaves, ale tainim, fig leaves, ale charuvin, carob leaves, so kol davar she'ein ra'ui ba'achila patur, right? So if you eat any of these things that are not really fit for consumption, you're patur. And then it tells you other things, right? Alei chizrin, alei kreshin, alei betzalim, alei yirakot, v'chol davar sharui la'achila chayav, right? So other things like leek or onion or onion leaves or these other kinds of leaves that people know they're edible, right? So I mean, we do eat, for example, you can eat grape leaves, but you only eat grape leaves if they've been in a brine of some sort, but you don't eat them raw, right? But these other things you can eat raw. So these things you eat them. Achal, chazar, v'achal. So we'll see. This is the source for the Rambam we just saw. You ate, and then you went back and ate. Chazar v'achal, and then you went back and ate. Im yesh mitchilat achila rishona ad sof achila achrona kedei achilat pras mitztarfin v'im lav ein mitztarfin. And then similarly, shata v'chazar v'shata. Im yesh mitchilat shtiya rishona ad sof shtiya achrona kedei shtiyat revi'it. Right. So if enough time passed that under normal circumstances you could drink a revi'it of liquid, that's the shiur to be mitzaref the drinking, which presumably is a much shorter amount of time. The imlav ein mitzarfin. Kashem shachila ben kach shtiya because zayit lachila shtiya ein mitzarfin. Hashotet. Actually, we'll leave some of this for another time. I'll just show you one other thing. In another Mishnah in Kritot. So this is in the third chapter of Kritot, and it's actually talking about eating chelev. I'm going to skip over some of this. In the second Mishnah, it says achal chelev b'chelev b'helem echad. If you ate two pieces of chelev with one helem, right, one unconscious state, meaning either you didn't know that what you're eating was chelev, or you didn't know that eating chelev was asur. Eino chayav ela chatat achad. And then it goes on to give other similar examples. And it says, Zechomer benin har. Actually, you know what? I'll read it and we'll finish. Right? So each of these things is their own isur. Chelev, dam, notar, pikul. Even if you ate them all in one unconscious act, but you're chayav for each one separately. So you'd have to bring 4 separate chataot. Zechomer b'minin harbe miminin achad. So this is a stringency about many different kinds of things over one thing, right? So if you only ate chelev, you only bring, let's say you had 4 pieces of chelev, but you ate the behelem echad, you only bring 1 korban chatat. But if you ate dam, notar, pigul, and chelev behelem echad, you have to bring 4 chatat. So that's the chumrah of minim harbe over minim echad. The chumrah b'min echad minim harbe. So what's the chumrah of min echad over minim harbe? Shimachal kachatzi zayit, v'chazar v'chal kachatzi zayit mimin echad, chayav. Mishnei minim patur. That is, if you behelem echad, you ate a chatzi zayit of chelev and then another chatzi zayit of chelev, so you have to bring a korban chatat. If you ate a chatzi zayit of chelev and a chatzi zayit of pigul, you don't bring a korban chatat. So in other words, they're not those two kazetim are not mitzdaref. And now the Mishnah says the kama yisha ochlan. So how long do you have? How long does the person have who's eating it? In other words, exactly this question. If you're eating a chatzi zayit or a chatzi shir of something, at what point, during what span of time will it still be mitzdaref to the first thing that you ate? So there's a machloket between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. So Rabbi Meir says, Ki'ilu achlan klayot. You measure it based on as if you were eating klayot. So klayot were parched grain. Klayot would be like if you took, right, and there was something they used to give to kids like candy. You would take like grain, it could be like wheat berries or barley corns that you would parch, and they would be eating like little nuts. And I'm assuming if, and they also have like a little bit of a sweetness to them just because of the natural thing. So that was something people would eat as a snack. So Rabbi Meir would say, so let's say you want
Doesn't
to
it
know.
come from kalui?
Yeah, it's parched, it's toasted. Right? So like the Torah says, lechem kali v'karmel lo tochlu aretzim hayom hazeh. Right? So lechem we know. Kali was this idea that even back then they would parch the grain, they would toast the grain, because that also makes it edible. Right? And carmel would be to eat it straight off of the to eat it while it's still completely fresh and it's edible at that point, right? Because it hasn't dried. So what does this mean? Kilu achlan klayot. So let's say if you have a slab of chaylev. So if you would, Rabbi Meir says the way you measure time is if you would divide that up into little pieces of klayot, like little pieces of grain, and you ate them like that, one at a time. That's the span of time. That's mitzaref all of the achila. And I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that could be a very long time, even for a relatively small amount of food. But I don't know. Chachamim say no, it's enough time that you would eat achilat pras. So what's achilat pras? So here the Bartanur is going to bring down this machloket. So first he explains kilo ochlan klayot roinotan kiilo nitpardu leperurin dakin keklayot. Right, you look at whatever it is that you're eating as if it had been chopped up into teeny little pieces that are like klayot, and you ate them one by one after the other, and that's how you estimate according to Rebbe Meir. So if you ate a chatzi zayid and then you stopped, and then after a time you ate another chatzi zayid, if you waited from the beginning to the end, kedei achilat klayot b'samuch zu lazu, then mitztarfin. But if you didn't, but if you never stopped eating, but you took time just to chew and to swallow, even the entire day, mitztarfin l'divrei Rebbe Meir. That would all be mitztaref according to Rebbe Meir, because that's how you would eat klayot. You might eat one little one, chew on it, and you would take time to chew it and then swallow it. And if you did that all day, and then you could take a relatively small amount of food and do that for a very long time. כלומר, אפילו לא הפסיק בין אכילת חצי זית אחר, אלא ששהה בלעיסת שני חצאי זיתים כדי אכילת פרס. In other words, even if you didn't actually interrupt, that you ate continuously one chatzi zayid after another, except that you took your time to chew and swallow. אלא ששהה בלעיסת שני חצאי זיתים כדי אכילת פרס מתחילת העירה ועד סוף בליעתן מצטרפים. יותר מכדי אכילת פרס אין מצטרפים והלכה כחכמים. In other words, this idea is, the examples that I've been giving, which are true, it could be that you eat a little, you wait a few minutes, and then you eat again. But it could also be that you're just eating continuously, right? You took a little bit of something, and then you chewed it, and then you swallowed it, and then you took another little bite, and you chewed it, and you swallowed it. So if that whole process takes more than kedei achilat pras, to eat one shiur, then you won't, here in this context here, you won't be chayav. So what's a pras? So he explains pras lashon prusa, right? It's something, literally something that's cut, but prusa usually refers to, a piece of, like a slice of bread. It's half of the size of a loaf that you would need to make an eruv. Mishalosh kikarot lekav, based on making 3 loaves from 1 kav of, from 1 kav of flour. Shekol kikar shmoneh beitzim. Each kikar is 8 beitzim. So half a kikar is 4 beitzim. Kach pirshu rabotai. That's how I learned from my rabbis, that kedei achilat pras is enough to eat the equivalent of 4 beitzim. The Rambam omer shu 3 beitzim, as we just saw. So, yes.
If the Chachamim had clocks and balances, they wouldn't get into all these problems. But the modern decisionists, they do translate all these things into grams and minutes and seconds and so on.
Yeah. So, yes, and that's a very interesting thing, and we've touched on it before. But I will just point out, and because we could talk a lot about this, and I think we should finish for now. But I will just point out that one of the things that's interesting regarding Yom Kippurim, when we saw this when we were in the Mishnah, we see it explicitly in the Rambam, that the shiur for drinking lekule alma on Yom Kippur is a relative shiur. It's relative to each of us as individuals. Right, it's below lugmav, and it's in contrast. The Rambam, if you continue in the Rambam, you'll see that's in contrast to Kotevet Agasa, which the Rambam says, whether it's a dwarf eating it or Og Melech HaBashan, who was a giant, because that was the Kabbalah of Chazal, that's enough to be miyashev da'at. So it might tell you something about the way Chazal understood the psychology, or the way we relate to food and drink. That drink maybe is something that's very particular to us, and maybe food less so. I don't know. It's a lot of interesting things to say about it. But yes, and anybody who's familiar with this, and you can look this up. And B'li Neder, we will look at some of the more modern halachic perspectives on this. But now, of course, we have the question. So, how long is this kedei achilat pras? How long is it before? Now, I will also just say one other thing to you, Paul. It's true they didn't have clocks, but we do have plenty of other halachot where we talk about hours and fractions of hours and minutes. And Chazal chose not to define it that way, and even the Rambam chose not to define it that way. So there is a tzad to say that kedei achilat pras, maybe that's also not an absolute shiur. Maybe that's a relative shiur. Maybe that's relative to each person. But we'll see. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.